Who is Leon Battista Alberti? The Renaissance influencer was born into a wealthy merchant family in 1404. Although Leon Battista Alberti was of illegitimate birth, his father made sure his education was strong. His father, a businessman, taught Alberti mathematics, and from there on, he was hooked on evaluating the rational structure of the natural world. His interest in mathematics would go on to influence his ventures into architecture. He later went on to study Latin at boarding school in Padua, where he fell in love with literature, forming his literary taste and becoming a strong writer. Shortly after, he went on to study law at the University of Bologna. Alberti's interests were almost exclusively secular. He was no man of the church and was really interested in science, math, and the arts. Alberti did not decide to take on architecture until nearly the 1440s. He became obsessed with a certain vision on each of his pieces of art. His last 20 years or so of living were spent on multiple grand architecture projects.
Alberti is one of the most influential architects of all time. He began in 1446 with his first major architectural commission, which was the Rucellai Palace, located in Florence. His plan for the palace jump-started his career, which would later be known as one of the best architects to ever live, influencing thousands of people. The design of this building was one of the first to use the new ideas of Renaissance architecture, which involved using symmetric pilasters and entablatures, and if you don't know what those are the platforms that generally sit on top of a pilaster. Alberti had a unique look on architecture, and he did not concern himself with the practicalities of his building, which resulted in many of his works going unfinished. He constantly talked about how important nature was to art and architecture as a whole, and he reverted back to a style known as classical orders, which was primarily distinguished by the use of columns. This type of style was different than the contemporary style used by many other architects at the time. Additionally, he was focused on the social side of architecture and thought about how the building would affect the cities that they are in.
Although largely dependent on Vitruvius's De Architecture, Alberti's The 10 Books of Architecture was the first theoretical book on the subject written in the Italian Renaissance, and in 1485 it became the first printed book on architecture. It covered a wide range of subjects from history to town planning and engineering to the philosophy of beauty.
Beauty, the adjustment of all parts proportionally so that one cannot add or subtract or change without impairing the harmony of the whole. Commissioned by local textile merchant Giovanni di Paolo Rucellai, Alberti took 14 years to design and build the newest part of the church. Most importantly, Alberti sought to improve and harmonize with the original medieval designs from the Dominican designers nearly 2 centuries prior. His improvements included humanist and classical elements by adding modern green pilasters and classic Dominican solar emblem as the centerpiece.
Old St. Peter's Basilica, built in the Vatican City, began construction from the orders of Roman Emperor Constantine I between 318 to 322 and took 30 years to complete. It stood from 4th century to 16th century and is considered a very famous piece of architecture and eventually became a major place in Rome. Throughout history, the basilica was constantly damaged. For example, in 846, Saracens sacked the city and damaged the basilica. By 15th century, the basilica was damaged and about to fall into ruin. Alberti was tasked with repairing it with another famous architect, at the time named Bernardo Rossellino. Shockingly, Alberti announced the basilica a structural abomination.
Alberti was commissioned to build the Basilica of San Andrea Mantua in 1470. However, it would be his last commission as it didn't break ground until 1472, just months before his death. It also took 3 centuries to complete and was not officially completed until 1790. The main focus of the basilica is a central archway flanked by Corinthian pilasters. The nave is roofed by a barrel vault and was one of the first times such a form was used in that large of a scale. Alberti originally planned for the roof to be coffered, but lack of funds led to the coffers being painted on after completion of the vault. The last aspects of Alberti's main design began implementation around 1597. In 1732, a massive dome began construction that was designed by Filippo Giuara. The final interior decorations were added by Paolo Pazzo in the late 18th century. Alberti's work has influenced much of today's architecture. As you can see with the Basilica of St. Andrea and the General Staff Building in Moscow, the symmetry of the arch in accordance with the pilasters is a noticeable similarity, as are the coffers that lie underneath the archway.